Genesis, welcome to the Happy Engineer podcast. So glad you're here today.
Hey, Zach, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and it's great to see you again, I should say. I am super excited about our interview on your amazing podcast. And so, shameless plug, GEMS podcast, GEMS, episode 744, already live. An amazing conversation on your show. And honestly, 700 plus episodes, Genesis, I have to hand it to you. Like, that is an extraordinary amount. Thanks for having me on. And everybody go listen to that and follow Genesis's podcast. But I wanted to ask you first before we get into your story and some of the things we talked about for today. Out of 700 and what, 50 now episodes that you've recorded, is there anything from the podcast that really surprised you? So, like an interview that was nothing like you expected, or a memory from your show, having done it this long, that really stands out? Because I'm just now creeping up on 100 episodes, and it's been an amazing journey building the Happy Engineer. But on GEMS, 700 plus conversations, what stands out to you as the most surprising or unexpected moment?
So there are a few. So I interviewed Janae Lincolns yesterday, and I had no idea how we connected or how we met. And I just boldly asked her, I was like, how did you find out about Jem's podcast? Because I didn't send her the podcast guest form.
Oh,
And she
interesting.
said, actually, my old resident coordinator blasts your podcast everywhere. And I was like, who is she or who is he? And she told me the name. I was like, I've never met that person. So this person just found my podcast, fell in love with it, started sharing it. She picked up on it and then somehow got a hold of my podcast guest form. And it was just a fluke. And I was like, hey, I'm actually going to be closing my books and going on a month-long hiatus. So if you want to do something, we need to do it today. And she's like, let's do 3 o'clock. And it was just like, bam, bam. So that was just like crazy and a fluke.
I like one thing for engineers, and I'm thinking of myself, is just the resistance to cold connecting with people. And not to say everyone needs to start a podcast, but one of the greatest things about having one is you can make these amazing human to human connections that you would otherwise never have an open door to connect, and you attract people who would otherwise never reach out to you just by having one. And I have several clients who are building their careers, and this is not something they want to start a business around, but they're launching podcasts just for that opportunity to reach out to executives or, CTOs and people who they would love to talk to about engineering. And having a podcast opens the door to having that conversation. When if you called that person or LinkedIn messaged them and said, do you want to have coffee? They would always say no. But if you say, would you be open to being a guest on my podcast? People will consider it and oftentimes say yes. So really interesting. But thanks for sharing those stories, Genesis.
So another thing for the audience, like what also gave me the courage and the confidence is before I really launched my show full-fledged, I was actually a podcast host for three different CEOs simultaneously. So they sent me their questions and I ran their show. So I was the interviewer of all their six-figure, seven-figure guests. And it was really cool because I got to meet all of these different people. And that also boosts my confidence because then I took my background coming from corporate America to partnering it with, CEOs that are in different industries than mine. And a lot of the feedback I got was, oh, it seemed like you knew about this industry where I had no idea about the industry that they were in, but I just knew how to connect with different
Yeah.
individuals and how to like drive a conversation and really make that individual feel seen and heard. And from those conversations, they started coming over into my ecosystem and etc. And it was a natural thing, not something that
Yeah.
was forced or etc.
I love that. I love that. And honestly, that skill of connecting with somebody who's completely different than you, different industry, maybe they're not in engineering at all, they work in sales, or they're an entrepreneur and you work in the Fortune 500 or whatever, to help them feel seen and heard and understood is a skill a lot of engineers need. I get asked all the time, Zach, what should I say? I hear you that I need to network with people more, but what should I say? And sometimes you gotta like, okay, hold on. If I give you the script, that's not the point. It's not the point. So Okay, I love this. Genesis, let's segue then. You mentioned your corporate America experience. Why don't you back up for us and tell us about where it began for you and a little bit of your story and what led to ultimately, your book and now your incredible platform that you've created through your podcast. But where did that all begin?
So actually in high school, I did a co-op program. So my first job was actually working for Remax Preferred Homes. I was a personal assistant to a brokerage, and that was really cool. And I tell people, I was young and dumb back then. I wish I would have knew what I know now and got a real estate license because the market totally boomed. And then after what happened in 2008, 2009, I was jobless and I needed to
Mm.
maintain a job for, school requirements. So that's whenever I switched over to the medical industry and I was working at the cancer center, and that was amazing. Fast forwarding to year to date, I'm actually still friends with one of the clients there. And she said one of the reasons that kept her motivated to keep on going with her treatment was the fact that every time she would come in and I would be at the front desk and checking her in, I always had a smiling face. I always had her
Aw.
snacks ready. And I would just really listen to her, what she was going on, and not feel like I was demeaning her or making her feel less than given the circumstances. And
Wow.
then after a new hospital opened up in our area, they stole all our patients. So y'all, they literally hijacked our patients because they had more equipment and it was state of the art, which, from a medical standpoint, you always want the best of the best, especially as technology advances. So then that left me jobless again. Networking is key. So I went back to my teacher at the time and she found me a job in oil and gas, and it was a smaller corrosion company. I entered there as an imaging clerk, left there as a HSC manager, which is health, safety, and environmental. So worked my way up. Then I
Hmm.
transitioned into a Fortune 500 company after staying with that small company for 4.5 years. Then I was at this big name Fortune 500 oil and gas company up until February 15th, 2021. And I was laid off in the pandemic, but during these experiences, I've learned a lot about myself because a lot of the times I may have been the only person that looked like me in the room. A lot of times I was the youngest. Oil and gas is a very male dominated field ran by older Caucasian males. So it's either like you get in line, but I tell people I got to where I was in my career, not by doing strange things for a piece of change, but by my education, networking, and just really building those connections and rapport and doing a lot of step out activities, meaning I would do my base job, but I would also see, okay, what other organizations are they partnering with, like United Way, Junior Achievement, the Red Cross, and etc. And I would find ways to volunteer with those organizations so I could get to know other people throughout the company that were volunteering at that organization too. And those rapports were built outside of work while doing something for
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
while also benefiting the community. And that's another way, like if you know that you're an introvert and you may not necessarily want to engage in certain extrovert activities, find something that ties to your heartstring, but it also ties to the heartstring of your company and other people within that company, and then use that as a link to connect. So that's kind of how I got to where I am now. And then the book came out of a day of frustration in corporate America, and I had no idea I was going to write a book, but it wasn't until I just got my thoughts out of my head onto paper. And then the Lord connected me with a lady who was an author at a local church here in Houston. And she told me about what she did. I was like, oh, her lifestyle's kind of sexy. And I invited her to coffee like a week later. She hooked me up with her publisher. And then the birth of Chocolate Drop in Corporate America, From the Pit to the Palace, came into fruition. And I wrote the entire thing on my cell phone because all I had at the time was a company issue laptop. And that's a big no-no to mix business and pleasure.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. You wrote the whole book on a phone. So let me jump in here. This is such an important part of the story. And again, the title of your book, Chocolate Drop in Corporate America, From the Pit to the Palace. And for anyone who's simply listening to the audio version of the podcast, you go check us out on YouTube. And you've got Zach White, the Caucasian male engineer here, and Genesis Kemp, the African American female. Totally different skin color, totally different gender, probably different height. We couldn't be more different. And it really sets the stage well for the conversation. And I want to play in a way, Genesis, some ignorant posture here. And I want to ask for your help and understanding around what you're so passionate about and what your book is around, and help to bring this conversation into a character and a light of what's really happening in the workplace. And how can a Zach White engineer who is a Caucasian male understand better and be an advocate and take action in a way that supports amazing leaders like yourself in their careers? And it's a difficult conversation for a lot of folks. And that's why I'm excited to hear your perspective, because you have that, I love the heartstrings, like you have such a big heart for this. And it's such a powerful topic. So take us to the moments or the kinds of places in your career that would help us understand where it is different for Zach versus Genesis, and how that showed up for you in your career.
When I started with this Fortune 500 oil and gas company, mind you, I left being an HSE manager at a smaller company. When they brought me in, they told me that I was going to be slotted as an administrative assistant. And I'm like, what? Have you not seen my resume or checked my credentials or my interview skills and all of that other stuff? Because I knew a lot about their proprietary rigs and et cetera, because I was the one on the other side of the table working on their top side level 1 inspection reports, doing their RFQs, requests for quotes, requests for bids. So I knew a lot about their assets over in EG, which is Equatorial Guinea. And they're like, how do you know so much? And I was like, well, I was the chick on the other side writing these reports for y'all and bidding them out to like the big companies like the Shells, the Chevrons, the BPs, and all of those things. So I had that knowledge. I was privy to it. And I was like, it was kind of a slap in the face. But then I kept hearing like a still small voice inside of me said, sometimes you have to take a step back, not saying that you're not worthy, but you have to take a lesser role in order to get your foot in the door to move up. And it was the salary was more, but then I felt like the workload was beneath me. But fast forwarding, not only did I take that administrative assistant role, the company ended up paying for part of my degree whenever I switched my major. So when I started, I was a psychology major. So I switched my major to supply chain and logistics and technology. And I have double minors in purchasing and OLS, which is organizational leadership and supervision. So while I was in my admin role, I was still working on my work, but also going to school at night, and then also seeing what is it that I want to do that is going to be a win for me, but a win for the company, to really have synergies there, because I knew time is equivalent to money and I didn't want to waste time because I'm young, I'm thriving, I want to be a go-getter. So then fast forwarding, I graduated and I was like, I went to school to be a supply chain person. I didn't go to school to be an admin. So you're either going to find me something or else. But then, of course, that's where a caveat came in, because if you left the company, you would have to pay back all the money that they spent. So I was like, okay, I'll wait out this 1 year to 2 year. So I ended up getting my first stint as a RMC, a raw material coordinator for PP, which is polypropylene. So I was in charge of sourcing all of the raw materials that went into making that chemical component. It was a stretch opportunity, but around the time, life circumstances happened. I got engaged to my now husband, wasn't even able to plan my entire wedding. My husband did all the stuff except my hair, makeup, and dress. And I was like, this dude is going to totally leave me because I can never make it to a meeting.
And that's because you were working so many hours at the time.
Yes, in the chemical plant. I had bought my first wedding dress for $200 from someone in the chemical plant who her daughter got pregnant, couldn't wear her wedding dress. I was like, I'll take it. I don't have time to go look for a wedding dress. Everyone told me that looks like a hot mess. You're not going to wear that. You need to go to David's Bridal or a bridal store. And I literally was trying to fit into the dress and like get a paper clip and try to close the back of it because the back was like so tight.
Oh my goodness. So well, tell me really quick though, when did the long hours begin? And what do you think caused that? Did you feel like, if I don't put in this time, I'm not going to get these opportunities, or this, like there's an expectation that I'm going to be here all the time, or everyone else is doing it? Like, tell us about that culture. What led you to being so busy you couldn't even plan your own wedding?
So one, the commute time, I was commuting like 2 hours one way to work and 2 hours back. And then the fact that I was the youngest person in the group and there was a lot of seniority in the group, I didn't want to be the new girl coming in, also leaving early and etc. So of course there are spoken as well as unspoken agendas and rules there to follow. And then also being Black and brown, you don't necessarily want to do something that someone else is not doing, because of course they may be looking at you a certain way or etc. And so I felt the pressure to just go in, work, stay the long hours. I knew that was going to be my first entry assignment in the professional world with this company, but I didn't want it to be my only assignment. And I didn't want it to be like whenever I saw other people that looked like me that were in either the paraprofessional bucket or they were just getting in their managerial professional technical, which is MPT, to just be slotted there because my goals and aspirations were so much bigger. So I was like, okay, what can I do to show that I could compete with the big dogs, but also not really make them look at me any different because I was the only one on my team,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think this is a really important point, and I'd love for you to extrapolate on it before we go back and figure out what happened in your wedding here. And again, I'm going to play, ignorant Zach for a moment. It's easy for me to say, well, if nobody did something mean or hurtful or outright discriminatory towards you in that role, then why would you feel like you need to outpace or outmatch every single person in order for them to not look at you in a different way? But I think what I'm hearing you say is like, look, maybe there are some of those outright things that do happen, but just being the only one like me in the room is enough to create this pressure. And it's like, there doesn't have to be Zach's a complete jerk as a boss who's a racist, horrible person. This is just an existing baseline of pressure that you feel when you step into that environment. Is that a fair way to describe it, or put it in your own words? What would that look like?
So that's a partial way to describe it. So I'll give you that there. The other part was whenever I got into this role, there was another lady who was African American. She was in the role for 9 years. The way that the supervisor at the time treated her, everyone said, oh my gosh, the way this lady was treated by the supervisor was just not acceptable or whatnot.
Yeah.
To where at first I was like, well, I don't know what I'm walking into, and who's to say that they haven't had other clashes outside of what we know. So I didn't want to make any assumptions or pass any judgments. But then whenever I was slotted in there, I started to see her treat me differently. It got so bad till one day where her and I were supposed to do a one-on-one meeting. I'm in my office, I'm having breakfast. I'm a big breakfast eater, y'all. So when I'm in my office, like I had the lights off, the blinds were open because I'm setting the tone. I have my essential oils going and all of that, and sometimes music in the background. And it's my office, so it's my space. So respect my space as if I were to respect your space if I'm going into your office. So she comes into the office, I think 5 to 10 minutes before our meeting time. And I'm like, oh, you're a little bit early. Like, can you come back so I can finish my breakfast? And I knew she was pregnant at the time. So, it could be her background, it could be hormones. And she was also Polish too. So different cultural too. And also a woman in a male dominated field. And she's like, no, put your breakfast away. I'm ready to start now. And I'm like, excuse me. I just told you I am eating my breakfast. You could come back in 5 to 10 minutes and I'll be more than happy to start the meeting with you. So she begins to raise her voice. At first, I'm there sitting there, and I was like, you know what? I'm an adult. She's an adult. You give respect where respect is due, and vice versa. And that's whenever I raised my voice, it got to the point where the team's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know Genesis could be like that. So people are coming out their offices looking, they're like, are you okay? I was like, yeah, I'm fine. And they're like, is she okay? And then she just storms off because of the clashes. And after that, I got on my computer and I sent a note to her manager, who was the one that talked me into going into that role. I was like, one, I will not be talked to a certain way. At the end of the day, I'm a human being just like she is. You will not talk to me in a condescending or demeaning manner. You also need to respect my space and my boundaries just as much as I respect your space and boundaries. And we need to act like civilized adults or whatnot. And then she would mumble like different sly remarks or whatnot. And it got to the point where it wasn't just me, it was also our whole hallway. So when people would see her coming, you would hear doors start closing. And I was like, what is this? And I was like, what is going on here? And it wasn't until she left on maternity leave that I got a new manager. And he's like, I am so glad I didn't listen to the feedback that she gave me about you because your ranking would have severely dropped. She tried to
Mm.
sink my ranking to a C because of just mere interactions that her and I had or whatnot. And sometimes the guys, because like I had more guy friends than girlfriends at the time. And, sometimes I would go to lunch with the guys. I don't know what it was, but like sometimes she would treat the males better than the females. And I would hear sly remarks like, oh, she's going to lunch with so and so or whatnot. Does her fiance know? At the end of the day, I'm an individual. I know like what I have at home. I know who I am. I know what my worth is. So just because I'm going to a lunch with a male figure does not mean that we're doing anything that's inappropriate.
Genesis, there's a lot here. And thank you for your candor. And maybe back to where I led in, this is both an existing pressure without action, and there are outright displays of inappropriate mistreatment of you. And I know that engineering leaders all around the world are going to hear this story and relate to parts of it in their own experience, whether it's because of age, because of gender, because of race or skin color. And there's 1,000 versions of this exact moment that you've experienced. And it just breaks your heart that it happens, but it happens all the time. And so I want to hear your perspective on the people who are on the offensive, the ones creating that situation for you. So in this case, your boss. As you've been a voice and an advocate in this space now after the fact, having gone through it, do you believe that people are consciously aware of how abusive or hurtful or inappropriate the actions are in the moment and they are doing it anyway? Or is your perspective that most of this is completely unconscious and completely blind to how much it's hurtful or inappropriate towards you in this case?
I think it's actually a mixture of both. And the reason why I think it's a mixture of conscious versus unconscious is, let me just add some context here. So whenever I moved out of that role into my compliance coordination role where I was managing PE, which is polyethylene, I got to travel with a tier 2 manager, meaning he didn't have any direct reports. We were flying into, I think it was Florida at the time, and I already had my hotel slotted and etc. And I remember he called me on the phone. I was like, hello. And he's like, do you think that you could switch my hotel to yours? And I'm like, no, but you could call your admin and she could do it. And he's like, well, I'm staying here. I was like, I'm sorry, I'm not staying at there. I'm only staying at the approved hotels that T&E approves. That hotel looks a little sketchy. And I was like, I'm only doing Hilton or whatever they approve. And I think it was the Hilton. Then fast forward, he ends up changing his hotel to mine. We land and I was like, okay, I'm going to go check in. We'll meet back down here so we could decipher how we're going to handle this business meeting with our client or whatnot. So then we get to dinner and he's like, what do you think people are saying about a young, nice looking African-American girl sitting with an older Caucasian male? And I was like, well, number one, I don't care what people are saying. Number two, we're sitting across the table from each other for a reason. Number three, you're married. I'm married. This is business. At the end of this work trip, you're going home to your wife. I'm going home to my husband. And I was like, what people's assumptions or whatever their thoughts are, et cetera, is not my business and should not be your business at all. We have a goal here, and it is to make sure that we're talking about these KPIs. We make sure that we're doing the appropriate thing to be branded by association. We're not tainting our brand whenever we're going out and representing ourselves, because even though we're not in our home base, we are still representatives of this company that we work for. And you never know who's who, and you never know who's watching. And so the mere fact that he mentioned that sly remark made me think, what else is he thinking in the back of his mind? And so it did make me feel a bit uncomfortable. So I handle myself with poise. I think I handle myself with tact. And when I got home, I was like, should I talk to another woman about this? Because who's to say if he's done this with another woman or not? And how did that woman feel, whether she was young in her career or maybe senior in her career? So that's why I think there's conscious and unconscious biases there. And not only did I have it from a Caucasian supervisor who was a female that was Polish, I've had it from a Caucasian male supervisor that was indirectly working with me at the time. And then
Yeah.
there were other things that happened with ICs, individual contributors who told me, what gives you the authority to, sit at this table or whatnot? Well, maybe my education, the same amount of education, or maybe you got here because of some people or your daddy pulls strings or whatnot, because there's a lot of nepotism as well as sexism, racism, and all of the isms in corporate America that people may or may not talk about.
Genesis, one of the hardest things about this whole dialogue, and there's so many places we can go with it, but again, putting myself back in Zach, the Caucasian male guy who wants to try to get this right. What can happen is now I end up a little bit afraid of entering into any of these conversations or dynamics because I don't know how to do it without accidentally offending someone or getting it wrong. And it's like, yikes, I don't ever want to be at the dinner table across from the young African-American woman, because what if I end up accidentally screwing this up or doing something appropriate? Now, I will say asking that question makes me feel gross, like that he said. So I'm pretty confident that wouldn't happen. But just to help engineers out there, regardless of which side of the table that they're sitting on. And, I know in your book you talk about these things, but if you were going to break it down and just help me understand, what are the mindsets or the actions that are most important that I can take to show caring and equality and respect and inclusion to everyone who I work with in a professional way? What are the most important things? If you're going to say, like, here's the 2 or 3 or 4 things, Zach, if you can just focus on these, you're going to get 90% of the way there. What would you recommend us to focus on to really create a powerful and collaborative and safe workplace for everyone?
So number one, transparency. Like, don't act like you know everything, and don't ever try to push your judgment or preconceived notions on somebody else, because you may make it seem like you're assuming what their reality is when you've never really set foot in that individual's reality. So you can't possibly understand what he or she may be going through unless you actually have walked in their shoes, or you have listen to them, and not listen to correct them, listen to understand and find some clarity where this male or female is coming from. Number two, put humanity back into conversations. Show that individual that even though you are different on the outside, you are still a human being just like he or she is. And you may have other things in common, commonalities, whether it's food, music, a book, and let that commonality drive the conversation versus making outward appearances and
Yeah.
socioeconomic statuses drive a wedge. You need to think about what ways can you come together as a unified front. You don't have to like each other or be best friends or chitter chatter like girlfriends or guy friends, but just show them respect that you say, hey, I see that you and I connect on this commonality. Let's talk about this. And then you could genuinely build a rapport with that individual. And then it makes it easier to ease into those hard conversations. Another thing I'll share here, if I can, Zach.
Please, no, go ahead.
Don't see it as a mere metric to check the box and say, yeah,
Yeah.
I did
Yeah.
diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. Let's move on. No, because you're just scratching the surface. You have to go beyond the surface. And whenever you are having these conversations, put a disclaimer up there. Say, hey, I'm not saying that I understand where you're coming from, because I could never be a Black woman, a Black
Right.
man,
Right.
or however that person chooses to identify. And don't make it seem like you know how that person identifies, because some people said, oh, you're African American. And people may get offended, like, no, I'm not from Africa, or I'm not African American. I'm Caribbean and South American descent. So don't assume what you think that individual is. Ask them, how do you want to be addressed? Tell them, I don't know what you're going through, but I want to learn a little bit more so I can see how I can engage in a conversation, or how can I be an ally, or how can I help? Don't just say, oh, I can help in this manner, because to you it may be helping, but to them it may be detrimental.
Genesis, the theme that I'm hearing you say, and it's been true in all of these dialogues I've had around tough topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging is the word conversation, and the willingness to have a courageous conversation with someone, to be open, to be vulnerable, to tell the truth, to ask hard questions, to not make assumptions. And the power of this really is in the conversation. And I think that's where, as engineers, we can stumble at times because we're so systematic, we're so focused on the actions and the how-tos, and we really want to just go solve the problem and move on to the next problem. And this is not one of those kinds of things. It's not that you just check the box, to your point, or if you just do this or wear these clothes or say this thing, then you're done. It really is about the humanity, the relationship building, and a courageous conversation. And I think there's so much fear about saying the wrong thing or offending someone or triggering someone. But if, at least this has been my experience, if you'll truly posture your heart in a sense of desire to just know the other person, to care for them, to share love with them, brotherly love, phileo love with that person, and get to know their story. Ignoring your story for a minute, leave your story at the door and go get curious about their story. You can say almost anything if it comes from a pure, genuine longing and desire to just know the person and to be curious. And if it's the wrong thing, but it's from that heart and that energy, they'll correct you. I identified you as African American at the beginning of our conversation, and I hadn't even remembered to ask. And it's just such a great example, or like we make these assumptions. And so, if you just come in and say, hey, Genesis, is it appropriate or correct to call you African American, or what do you like to be referred to as? If it's a genuine question, you're going to respond with such care and appreciate it. But if it comes from an attitude of like, I just need to go check my freaking DEI box and get this done. Like, so are you African American or black? Like, what are you? Like that's a whole different energy, right? And somebody could be completely offended by that. And so that's my encouragement for myself to remember this. And for every engineering leader who I work with, who's on any side of this table, is like, look, first step, let's just check your heart. Where are you coming from? What is your actual intention and mindset around this topic? And if we can get that in line, then the specific mechanics of what to say and how to say it, honestly, you can miss by a pretty long margin and be just fine. But if your heart's in the wrong place or you really don't care about the person, then you can say it just right and still piss them off. And so would you agree with that? I mean, is that your experience?
I would definitely agree with that statement. And one thing I would say here is if you're having a conversation, and this is how you can know if you're having a genuine conversation and if you're being true to yourself and transparent and also being fair to the other person, is if you can't talk about something that you would talk about with your family around this person, and if you say certain things or lingos around your family that you wouldn't say in front of this individual, it's deemed inappropriate. And that means that you have some inner things to work through because there's still some residues or remnants there within your upbringing and your lifestyle that has you putting up a wall when it comes to this individual. And this individual should not be categorized based on experiences that you may have had with someone else within that racial group or sector, because this individual is totally different. And you can't say you people or you all are just alike, because then you're marginalizing that individual and putting them in a bucket that individual may not fit that bucket or that mold. So you have to think about that there, because then you think that you're having a conversation to break down the walls, when in actuality you're building up the walls because of your tone of voice, your body language, and what's coming out of your mouth is cutting off the conversation versus making it a conversation that can go from just a survival conversation to really thriving and getting to really know that individual and see, okay, can me and this individual work together? Can we really collaborate? Can we create some synergies? But if you're just talking to them like they're beneath you, and if you're knowing, oh man, these people, and you have these thoughts in your head, before you know it, you're going to have those faux pas and it's going to slip out of your mouth. And that individual's going to be like, I knew they were just coming over here to check the box to just kind of show they care. I knew they didn't really care.
I love this word individual, just your intention to use it. And that's a great place for us to keep the focus. Every single person has their own story. Let's not paste all of our past experiences with other folks who match them in these different categories. Go get curious about that unique individual's story. Genesis, thanks for your courage to just put this out here and share with me and let me ask awkward questions and get into it with you. I really do appreciate it. And I know it's super helpful for every engineering leader to just be able to get into this space in a safe way. And so if someone wants to grab a copy of your book or get to know you and your amazing work more, where can people connect with Genesis and take this further?
So you can find me on my website, genesisamariskemp.net. It's my full name, .net. You'll also grab a copy of the book there. That I'm giving the first chapter away for free. And for those of you who are listening via audio, you may not see the cover of the book, but there's actually a world on the cover of the book to let people know these issues don't just happen here in America, but they happen worldwide. There's all types of people from various backgrounds and ethnicities on the cover of the book, letting people know we all face issues no matter what industry that you're in, whether it's racism, sexism, nepotism, or whatever the case may be. And those are challenges that we each go through, which makes us an individual and have our own individual stories to work through. Each one of us has our trials and tribulations, but once you get over those trials and tribulations, it becomes your testimony. So when I stand here and talk to y'all today, I want to ask you, what is your pit to palace story? Because you may have had those downfalls in your life, but how did you work through those to have your upfalls and your upswing moments? And that is part of your character. It's part of your story. It gives you that unique experience and also shows who you are individually. And it gives you that resilience to persevere and help other people. That's why it's called breakthrough. It broke you, but you made it through to the other side.
Genesis, thank you so much for this and excited about it. I will make sure all those links are in our show notes and encourage every engineering leader to go check it out if these topics are a passion and of great importance to you. Genesis, I'm excited to finish with you today, and I always end in the same place. And you're going to be especially appreciative of this as a life coach yourself with your amazing podcast, all the work that you've done in these spaces around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And it's that as a coach or a great engineer, the questions lead, the answers follow. And if we want better answers in our lives, then we need to ask better questions. So for the happy engineer who's been listening to this conversation today, who wants to take their career to the next level, who wants to do it in a way that honors and respects everybody that they work with in the world, what would be the best question that you would lead them with today?
What is keeping you personally, professionally, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually bound and confined to your comfort zone?
Oof. My heart is excited about that question because the comfort zone, I'm a big fan of crushing comfort. I love that. I love that. So what is holding you back or keeping you in the comfort zone in all of these different domains? And can you repeat those one more time for us?
Yes, I'll say the question again. What is keeping you confined and in bondage to your comfort zone, personally, professionally, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, where you are just locked to your comfort zone and you don't want to break out of that mold?
So good. Genesis, thank you again for being with me today. This has been awesome. And we'll have to catch up again and do another round of conversations. There's a lot more to dig into, but it's been super fun. Thanks again.